If we applied a texture onto this object at this point, it wouldn't look so good because we do not have proper UV coordinates on the model. And now is the point in our workflow in which we need to do that. Let's see what happens if we assign a texture onto that surface. I'll select it and go into its material with the attribute editor, Control A. Scroll over with the arrows here to the very right-hand side and go to Sofa Material. And we can drop a map into the color slot here. Click to create a map. Add render node. And then click File. And browse for the file. Once again, we're taken to Multipart Model Project Source Images. Let's choose Blue Raspberry Stripes.jpg and click Open. And to see it in the viewport, we need to give focus to the viewport and press the 6 key. So click anywhere in the view and press 6. And you can see it looks pretty terrible. We have all kinds of stretching and all sorts of issues. The size is all wrong as well. We want it to be consistent and properly scaled. To do this, we go into the UV texture editor. But first we have to have some base texture coordinates on here to work with. Right now it'll look dreadful if we go into the texture editor. Let's just see. So with that object selected, go to Polygons, Edit UVs, UV Texture Editor, and what we see here is the layout. We can zoom with the wheel or Alt right mouse, and we can pan with Alt middle mouse. The UV layout is here superimposed over the image. We might want to go up here to the image menu and dim that image. Now it's a lot easier to see. This is why we get so much stretching and why it's way too large. What we want is a UV layout that shows this little fabric swatch as being pretty small on these surfaces. So we could scale this directly if we want. We could right click and choose Shell and then select, and now we've selected all the parts. All the connected parts are shells. And then scale it with the normal scale tool. And we can see that we're able to affect the UV mapping, but what we really need to do is to organize it so that we have really nice clean projections on all these surfaces. And for that, we can use automatic mapping. I'm going to close the UV texture editor, right click and make sure I'm in object mode and select. And then go up into Create UVs, Automatic Mapping. And now we've got something on here. It's not perfect, but it's something. And then let's go back into the UV texture editor, Edit UVs, UV texture editor. And what it's done is cut all the pieces apart and lay them out flat so that we have everything fitting within the texture or the 0 to 1 UV space. U runs left to right, 0 is here and 1 is here. And V runs up and down, 0 is here and 1 is here. So everything is fitting within the UV 0 to 1 space here. And that would be fine if we were actually painting this. If we were taking this into Photoshop and actually creating a paint job for it, then we would need to stay within the 0 to 1 space. But in this workflow, we have an existing texture that we want to tile multiple times across this surface. And to accomplish that, we need to scale these UVs so that they're larger than the 0 to 1 space. And this is something that you will hear a lot is you can never be outside the 0 to 1 space. Well, you of course can be, but you should never be outside the 0 to 1 space if you're planning to then paint that texture later. Okay, so in this case we're fine. We can right click once again and go into shell mode and select all the shells. And again, choose the scale tool and then scale those up. And we're just really eyeballing this. We don't really have any point of reference to know how large we want this to be. It's just whatever looks good, essentially. We can also rotate. We can use the rotate tool or just press the E key on the keyboard. And I want to rotate in increments, so hold down J, which is discrete rotate, or snapping for rotations. And I can rotate that around, and now you can see that the stripes are running in a different direction. Now we need to sew the bits together. We have gaps here, as you can see. And in this particular case, it's not too egregious. It's not too big of a problem. If I deselect the object, let's right-click and go to Object Mode, and then click off of it, and also turn off Wireframe on Shaded just for a moment. it's not that bad at the seams. But if we get in really close, we will see that there are some discontinuities. We need to be very close to be able to see that, but it is there. To fix that, what we want to do is sew the UV shells together. Select the object once again. And here's the workflow for sewing these UV shells together. I'll dolly back here and just start from the bottom. So here's the first pair. And go into Edge mode. Right-click and choose Edge. And click on one of the outer edges. And what you should see is somewhere on the layout, another edge should highlight. There are two corresponding edges here. And at either end of each one of those edges is a UV point. And there are more UV points than there are regular vertices on the model currently. So there's a UV point here and a UV point here, but each one of those relates to the same vertex on the object. Okay, so with those two selected, and with the two shells positioned near one another, sort of facing each other, then we can just go into the Polygons menu within the UV Texture Editor and choose Move and Sew UV Edges. And now that's been sealed up. We'll need to repeat that process of sewing edges together. And sometimes the shells are not right next to each other. They may have been laid out differently. We need to do some detective work on the automatic mapping, figure out what it's done, and then heal up the object and sew it up accordingly. Let's go around and select some of these other edges. So I'll try this one here. Still in Edge component mode. Select that one. And we see that the one across from it did not light up. So that's not the adjoining shell that needs to be sewn. Dolly back a bit and we'll see that in fact it's this one. This shell should be connected to this one. I'll right-click and go into Shell Component mode and then select that one, hold down Control-Shift and select this one. Move them out of the way. Just push them over to the side and verify, in fact, that these two are supposed to be connected to each other. Move it up close there. And then once again, go into Edge Component mode. Right-click and choose Edge. Select an edge and make sure that the one across from it is lighting up as well. All right, that's good. Polygons. Move and sew UV edges. Now that's done. We just need to continue this process, sewing all of the pieces together. And when we're finished, we'll have one seamless object that's got all the UVs in one shell. You can lay it out however you want. Your goal here is to try to emulate the way things are really built, and that's truth to material. So how would we actually stretch fabric across this? Probably in one big sheet all the way across. And there would probably be some seams at the bottom out of the way. So we can go ahead and figure out which is going to be the edge seam. And I'm still in Edge component mode. So when I click here, this lights up there. So that tells me that this is going to be one of the sort of terminal edges down here at the bottom. It's not going to be connected to the others. Cool. So that's a good guideline. And we're still in Edge component mode. And we just need to go around and select all these and figure out where their corresponding edges are. Let's get in real close. And then dolly back out again. Okay, so this wants to get sewn on here. We'll go into Shell mode, select it, move it into position, get in closer, right-click and go into Edge. Select it, make sure its neighbor is also selected, and then move and sew the edges. And there's some icons up here that you can use as well. So this is sew, and this is move and sew here. I've taken a few moments and sewn the rest of those edges together for the main panels here. So the front, top, back, and bottom are all one giant piece, but the sides are separate. Let's take a look at those, and we can see how this fabric is not aligned with the actual geometry. We can make this pattern stretch across that surface if we want. To do that, we can go directly into UV component mode. Get in close here. Right-click and choose UV and select. And it looks like that's on the other side. We can always tell by looking in the viewports. So those are the UVs. And I can actually just move them, just with the ordinary move tool or the W key, and push those. And you can see as I move that, this is straightening out. It's even clearer if this is directly over the texture here. So I can move that whole shell. Right click and go to Shell mode, move it over a bit. And we can see what we're doing a little bit more clearly here too. Right-click and go into UV component mode. So you can see how the placement here directly corresponds to the end result here. Just want to straighten this out and make it into more of an L shape here in the UV layout. As you can see, we get a little bit of distortion here. These kind of get bent a bit funny, depending upon where you move this. So you might see something weird like that. The more UVs you have on the model, the less of this kind of strangeness you'll have. This is a very low polygon object. I can kind of sort of fudge this or sort of make up the difference here by stretching this a bit. And that way we won't have any weird, strange bends here. So it looks like that fabric has been more or less stretched onto that object there. All right, same thing on the other side. Just move these around a bit. The last thing I want to do for this UV layout is to sew the sides onto the main part of the fabric. You don't really need to do that, but I just want to. We move this out of the way and get these sort of in position here. Need to figure out where it needs to get sewn. So I want there to be a seamless zone right here. So let's go into Edge component mode. Right-click and choose Edge. Select one of these edges, and you're not sure which one you want, but select around until you find the right one. And when you select one of these, what will happen is you'll get both an edge lighting up somewhere on the side and also on the main part of the fabric layout. And in this case, we're going to actually make it sort of physically impossible, but interesting looking. I'm going to sew this bit on here, which means that the bottom here is going to sort of fold under and be underneath or coincident with this part of the UV layout. All right, so with that selected, I'll go ahead and click on Move and Sew. And then on the other side, same thing. I want to select one of these edges here. Not sure which one. Looks like that's the one here. And once again, Move and Sew. And now those pieces are all sewn on so that this, in fact, is seamless right here, across here. I could have made it seamless across the top or really anywhere. I just chose to do it there. So I just went the extra mile on that. I didn't really need to, but we got a nice solid UV layout now. We can close the UV texture editor, go back into the object mode. And we want to save this with its current history. So we're going to go ahead and click File, Save Scene, and then delete the construction history. Select it, edit, delete by type history, and then save a new version. File, increment, and save. And now we're on version 3.